The champagne glass shattered against marble as Zane's body hit the water, the impact stealing her breath and the life growing inside her. Above the pool's edge stood Marcus, her ex, his face twisted with rage and satisfaction. But he hadn't seen the shadow that moved through the garden like death itself. Kim Ha-jin, Seoul's most feared Mafia boss, had been watching his pregnant wife from the terrace, and in that split second as she disappeared beneath the surface, something ancient and violent erupted in his chest. He was moving before conscious thought, his perfectly tailored suit forgotten as he dove after her, his heart screaming what his lips had never said. When he pulled her gasping body against his, water streaming down their faces, his dark eyes promised Marcus a reckoning that would make hell look merciful. Welcome to Afro-Korean Drama Hub, dearest friend. Please like, share and subscribe. Tell us where you're watching from. 3 months earlier, Zayn had stepped into the grand ballroom of the Schiller Hotel with no idea her entire life was about to detonate. She was there covering Seoul's most exclusive charity gala as a journalist for an international magazine, her camera hanging against her deep burgundy dress, her natural curls swept up in an elegant twist. She'd been warned about the guest list, about the dangerous men who move through Seoul's upper echelons like apex predators in designer suits. She'd been specifically warned about Kim Ha-jin. She saw him before he saw her, and even across the crowded room, the air seemed to thin. He stood near the bar, surrounded by men who looked both protective and terrified, his presence commanding space without effort. His black suit was cut with devastating precision across broad shoulders, his dark hair styled back to reveal a face that belonged on ancient warrior sculptures. But it was his eyes that arrested her, obsidian and bottomless, scanning the room with the cold assessment of someone who saw threats everywhere and feared nothing. Then those eyes found her, and Zayn felt the impact like a physical thing. Time didn't stop, it shattered. Something passed between them that had no name, no explanation, a recognition that reached past logic into something primal and inevitable. Ha-jin's entire body went still, his conversation dying mid-sentence, his companions following his gaze with growing alarm. For 5 seconds, 10, they simply stared, and Zayn felt heat bloom across her skin under that intense scrutiny. He moved toward her like gravity had shifted, and suddenly she was the center of the universe. Zayn's instinct screamed to run, but her feet remained rooted as he closed the distance with predatory grace. Up close, he was even more devastating, tall enough that she had to tilt her head back, close enough that she caught his scent, something dark and expensive that made her dizzy. "You're not on the guest list," he said in perfect English, his voice deep and measured, each word deliberate. It wasn't a question. "Press credentials," Zayn managed, lifting her camera slightly, trying to steady her racing pulse. "Zayn Mitchell, International Cultural Review." Something flickered in those dark eyes, something almost like amusement but far more dangerous. "I know who you are. I know everything about everyone who enters spaces I control." He paused, his gaze travelling over her face with unnerving intensity. "What I don't know is why looking at you feels like recognition." The honesty of it stole her breath. Before she could formulate a response, a woman in a glittering gold gown appeared at Ha-jin's elbow, her possessive hand on his arm, making territorial claims clear. "Oppa, they're waiting for your speech," she purred in Korean, her eyes dismissing Zayn with practiced cruelty. Ha-jin didn't look away from Zayn, didn't acknowledge the woman's touch. "Tell them to wait," he said flatly, still in English. The woman's face flushed with humiliation, but she retreated, and Zayn felt a dangerous thrill at the casual display of power. "That was rude," Zayn said, finding her voice lifting her chin. "That was honest," Ha-jin countered. "She means nothing to me. You, however, have become a problem I didn't anticipate." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "I want to know everything about you, but I already know that won't be enough. I want to understand why you've disrupted my evening, my focus, possibly my entire carefully controlled existence." "That's not my fault," Zayn whispered, but her body betrayed her, swaying slightly toward him. "No," he agreed, his voice dropping lower, intimate despite the crowd around them. It's fate's fault, and I've never believed in fate until approximately 3 minutes ago. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her wrist where her pulse hammered visibly. Have dinner with me tomorrow. It wasn't a question, but Zane shook her head anyway. I don't date sources, and I definitely don't date men who look at me like I'm prey. Something dangerous flashed across his face, something possessive and absolute. I don't look at you like prey, Miss Mitchell. I look at you like you're mine, and I'm trying to understand how that's possible when we've only just met. He withdrew his hand, but the connection remained, electric and undeniable. Tomorrow, 8 o'clock, my driver will collect you from your hotel. Wear whatever makes you feel powerful, because you'll need it. Then he was gone, moving through the crowd toward the stage, and Zane stood trembling in the middle of the ballroom, every cell in her body screaming that she'd just encountered something that would either save her or destroy her completely. She tried to focus on her work for the rest of the evening, capturing images of Seoul's elite, conducting brief interviews, but her attention kept drifting back to Ha-jin. He gave his speech with the kind of commanding presence that made the entire room fall silent, his words about supporting underprivileged youth programs somehow more impactful because everyone knew the darkness he came from. When he stepped off the stage, at least a dozen people tried to approach him, but his eyes found Zane across the room, and the look he gave her was pure possession. By the time she made it back to her small hotel in Itaewon, 3 things had arrived before her. A bouquet of deep red roses so dark they were almost black, a handwritten note in elegant script that simply said, "Until tomorrow," and a background check report on her that was so thorough it should have terrified her. Instead, as she sat on her narrow bed reading through the pages Ha-jin's people had compiled, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt seen. The next evening, Zane told herself she wouldn't go. She told herself right up until she found herself in the most elegant black dress she owned, her curls loose around her shoulders, her heart hammering as a sleek black Mercedes pulled up exactly at 8. The driver was silent and professional, taking her through Seoul's glittering streets to a private restaurant she'd heard whispered about but never seen, the kind of place where reservations took months and discretion was absolute. Ha-jin was waiting in a private room that overlooked the Han River, the city lights reflecting off water like scattered diamonds. He stood when she entered, and the look on his face made her feel like the most beautiful woman who'd ever existed. He'd traded his suit jacket for just the white dress shirt and dark slacks, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that suggested strength, usually hidden beneath expensive fabric. "You came," he said, and there was something almost vulnerable in those 2 words. "I'm professionally curious," Zane lied, accepting the chair he held out for her. "I want to understand what kind of man commands a room full of Seoul's elite with a single glance." "A dangerous one," Ha-jin answered honestly, settling across from her, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "A man who's built an empire on fear, respect, and absolute control. A man who's never lost focus, never been distracted, never wanted anything he couldn't take or buy." He paused, something intense and almost helpless crossing his features. "Until yesterday, when a woman with eyes like midnight walked into my world and made me question everything." Zane's breath caught. "You don't know me." "I know enough," he said quietly. "I know you left New York after a relationship ended badly. I know you're brilliant at your work, that you see stories other journalists miss because you look for humanity instead of scandal. I know you're independent to the point of self-sabotage, that you don't trust easily, and that right now you're terrified of whatever this is between us." "You investigated me," Zane said, torn between anger and something that felt dangerously like being seen. "I protect what's mine," Ha-jin said simply. "And yes, I know that's insane. I know I sound possessive about someone I've just met, but I stopped lying to myself about what I want the moment I saw you." He leaned forward, his intensity almost overwhelming. "I want to know everything, Zane. I want to know what makes you laugh, what keeps you awake at night, what dreams you're chasing, what fears you're running from. I want to earn the right to stand between you and anything that tries to hurt you." "That's not normal," Zayn whispered, but her body was responding to every word, heat pooling low in her belly, her skin hypersensitive. "Nothing about this is normal," Ha-jin agreed. "I'm offering you honesty, not normalcy. I'm offering you a man who will terrify you with how much he wants you, who will be jealous and possessive and probably drive you insane, but who will also worship you, protect you, and make sure you never doubt for a single second that you're the center of his universe." The waiter interrupted with their first course, and Zayn used the moment to try to collect herself, but it was impossible under Ha-jin's steady gaze. They talked through dinner, and it was terrifying how easy it was, how he listened to her stories about growing up in Brooklyn, about the journalism program that changed her life, about her mother who'd raised her alone and taught her to be strong, about the writing that felt like breathing. When she mentioned Marcus, Ha-jin's entire demeanor shifted. "Tell me about him," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Tell me about the man who hurt you." Zayn hesitated, but something about Ha-jin's intensity made her want to be honest. "We were together for 2 years. I thought we were building a life together, but he was building debt in my name, using my credentials, my reputation. When I found out, when I confronted him, he didn't apologize. He laughed, said I was too trusting, too naive, that I'd made it easy." She looked down, at her hands. "I left with nothing but my camera and a plane ticket to Seoul. Starting over felt easier than staying in a city where everyone knew I'd been a fool." Ha-jin was quiet for a long moment, and when Zayn looked up, the expression on his face made her shiver. It was cold fury mixed with something protective and absolute. "What's his full name?" he asked. "Why?" Zayn asked, though part of her already knew. "Because I want to know the name of the man who made you feel like trust was weakness," Ha-jin said simply. "Because I want to understand what kind of fool looks at you and sees an opportunity instead of a gift." "Ha-jin, you can't just—" "I can do whatever I want," he interrupted, but his voice was gentle. "But I won't, not without your permission. I'm not trying to control your life, Zayn. I'm trying to show you that you don't have to carry everything alone anymore." Something in her chest cracked open at that. She told him Marcus's name, watched something. Dangerous flash in Ha-jin's eyes, then pushed forward with her own questions. "What about you? What made you into this? Into someone who runs Seoul's underworld?" Ha-jin's jaw tightened, but he answered, "My father was brutal, not to me, but to everyone else, and I learned early that power meant survival. When he died, I was 23 and surrounded by men who wanted to take everything he'd built. I had to be harder, colder, more ruthless than any of them just to stay alive." He paused, something vulnerable crossing his features. "I haven't let anyone close since then, couldn't afford the weakness, couldn't risk the distraction. Every woman who's tried has wanted the power or the money, never the man underneath." "And you think I'm different?" Zayn asked softly. "I know you are," Ha-jin said with absolute certainty. "You look at me like I'm human, like the violence and the power are things I do, not things I am. And when you look at me, Zayn, I want to be the man you see instead, of the monster everyone else fears." The honesty of it devastated her. They finished dinner in a tension that felt almost unbearable, the air between them charged with possibility and danger. When Ha-jin walked her to his car, his hand rested on the small of her back, and the touch felt like a brand through the fabric of her dress. "I want to see you again," he said, as they stood beside the Mercedes, the city lights casting shadows across his face. "Tomorrow, the day after, every day until you stop looking at me like I'm a risk you're not sure you should take." "What if I never stop looking at you like that?" Zayn asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Ha-jin stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her jaw, his thumb brushing across her cheek with devastating gentleness. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm worth the risk," he said quietly. "I'll show you that choosing me isn't weakness or foolishness. It's the bravest thing you'll ever do, and I'll make sure you never regret it." He didn't kiss her, though she could see the restraint it took, could see the hunger in his eyes. Instead, he opened the car door and waited until she was settled before closing it with careful control. As the driver pulled away, Zayn looked back to see Ha-jin standing in the street, watching her leave like he was already planning how to bring her back. Later that night, her phone buzzed with a message. "Thank you for tonight, for talking to me like I'm a man instead of a monster. Sleep well, beautiful. You're safe in this city, I promise you that." And somehow, impossibly, Zayn believed him. The following morning, Zayn woke to find her hotel room filled with white peonies, her favourite flower, something she'd mentioned casually over dinner. The card read simply, "I listen to everything you say." Her heart hammered as she dressed for a day of interviews, trying to focus on work, but Ha-jin had already slipped under her skin like a fever she couldn't shake. Noon, he'd sent lunch to her hotel, traditional Korean dishes she'd mentioned wanting to try. By 3, her editor called, confused about why a major Seoul corporation suddenly wanted to sponsor a full feature on international journalists adapting to Korean culture, with Zayn as the centerpiece. By evening, when she finally texted him to stop, his response was immediate. "I can't stop. You've become my obsession, and I'm not apologizing for it. Dinner again tonight, or I'll come to you, and I promise I won't behave as well as I did last night." She should have said no. Instead, she found herself in another devastating dress, this time deep emerald that made her skin glow, waiting when his car arrived. Ha-jin took her to his penthouse this time, a sprawling space high above the city with floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist luxury that somehow felt warm because he was in it. He'd cooked, or tried to, and the sight of Seoul's most feared Mafia boss struggling with pasta sauce while wearing an apron over his expensive shirt made something dangerously tender bloom in her chest. "I wanted to show you I'm more than what people say," he admitted as they ate on his balcony, the city spread below them like a kingdom. "That I can be normal, domestic, the kind of man who deserves someone like you." "You don't have to perform for me," Zayn said softly, reaching across the table to touch his hand. The contact sent electricity through both of them. "I see you, Ha-jin, the real you underneath everything else." Something shifted in his expression, something raw and needy. "Stay tonight," he said, his voice rough. "Not for anything physical, just stay. Let me hold you while you sleep. Let me know what it feels like to have you close without the world watching." Every logical part of Zayn's brain screamed warnings, but her heart was louder. She nodded, and the relief that flooded Ha-jin's face was almost painful to witness. They moved inside as the city lights began to twinkle, and Ha-jin gave her one of his shirts to sleep in, the fabric swallowing her curves in a way that made his eyes darken with possession. When they finally lay down in his massive bed, Ha-jin pulled her against his chest with a gentleness that contradicted everything about his reputation. His arms wrapped around her like she was precious, breakable, essential. "I've never done this," he admitted into the darkness. "Never wanted someone close enough to see me vulnerable. But with you, Zayn, vulnerability feels like strength because I trust you with it." She fell asleep to the sound of his heartbeat, and when she woke in the early hours, she found him still awake, watching her with an expression so intense it should have terrified her. "I'm falling in love with you," he whispered. "I know it's too soon, I know I sound insane, but I need you to know. Whatever this is, it's not casual for me, it's everything." Zayn's breath caught, her own feelings a tangle of fear and recognition. "This is crazy," she whispered back. "Then be crazy with me," Ha-jin said, pulling her closer. "Let me show you what it's like to be loved by someone who will burn down the world before letting anything hurt you." The next few weeks became a blur of stolen moments and growing addiction. Ha-jin was insatiable in his attention, showing up at her interviews with coffee, sending his men to ensure her safety, clearing his schedule to spend every available moment with her. He took her to private art galleries and street food vendors, to his secret office where he ran his empire and the quiet temple where he went to think. He introduced her to his inner circle, men who looked at her with initial suspicion that transformed into respect when they saw how Ha-jin softened around her. But the darkness of his world began to seep in. Zayn started noticing the bodyguards that followed at a distance, the way conversations stopped when she entered rooms, the tension that lived in Ha-jin's shoulders whenever they were in public. She saw him take a call one night that made his entire demeanour shift, watched him leave their dinner with murder in his eyes and return 2 hours later with blood on his knuckles that he tried to hide. "Talk to me," she demanded that night in his penthouse, blocking his path to the bathroom. "Tell me what you do, what you're protecting me from, what all of this really means." Ha-jin looked at her for a long moment, something like pain crossing his features. "I hurt people who threaten what's mine," he said finally, brutally honest. "I run businesses that exist in shadows, I make decisions that keep me awake at night, and I've done things that should make you run screaming. But I won't lie to you, Zane. I won't pretend I'm something I'm not." "Show me your world," Zane said, stepping closer. "All of it. Trust me the way you're asking me to trust you." So he did. Over the following days, Ha-jin pulled back the curtain on his empire, showing her the legitimate businesses that fronted the darker operations, the network of loyalty he'd built, the enemies who circled like sharks waiting for weakness. He showed her the good too, the protection he provided to neighbourhoods the police ignored, the way he funded schools and hospitals while demanding absolute secrecy. It was complicated and morally grey, and Zane found herself understanding that Ha-jin existed in spaces where traditional morality didn't apply. A month after they met, Ha-jin took Zane to a company gala, making their relationship public for the first time. She wore red, a colour he'd requested, and the way he looked at her when she emerged from his bedroom made her feel like a goddess. At the party, his hand never left her body, marking territory, announcing ownership. When a business associate made the mistake of complimenting Zane a bit too enthusiastically, Ha-jin's response was immediate and terrifying. His entire demeanour went arctic, his grip on Zane's waist tightening possessively. "She's mine," Ha-jin said softly, but the words carried lethal promise. "Look at her like that again, and you'll learn exactly what I do to men who disrespect what belongs to me." The man went pale and retreated, and Zane should have been angry about being claimed so publicly, but instead she felt heat flood through her. Later, in a quiet corner, she confronted him. "That was caveman behaviour," she said, but her voice was breathless. "That was honesty," Ha-jin countered, backing her against a wall, his body caging hers. "I told you I'd be jealous and possessive. I told you I'd be territorial about you. If that's too much, tell me now, because it's only going to get worse as I fall deeper." "And if I like it," Zane whispered, her hands coming up to his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palms. "If I like knowing I'm yours, that you'll defend me, that you lose control when someone looks at me wrong." Something dangerous and hungry flashed in Ha-jin's eyes. "Then we're going to have a problem," he said roughly, "because I'm trying very hard to be patient, to court you properly, to give you time to be sure. But when you say things like that, when you look at me like you want me as much as I want you, my control starts to slip." "Maybe I want it to slip," Zane breathed, and then his mouth was on hers, finally, devastatingly. The kiss was everything, consuming and possessive and desperate. Ha-jin kissed her like he was drowning and she was air, like he'd been starving and she was sustenance. His hands tangled in her curls, angling her head for deeper access, and Zane melted against him, every nerve ending alive. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ha-jin rested his forehead against hers. "Come home with me tonight," he said roughly. "Let me show you how completely you've destroyed my control, how much I need you." They barely made it through his penthouse door before Ha-jin was kissing her again, walking her backward toward his bedroom, his hands reverent and desperate on her body. He undressed her slowly despite the hunger in his eyes, worshipping every inch of revealed skin with kisses and whispered praise. When they finally came together, it was explosive and tender, passionate and somehow sacred. Ha-jin made love to her like she was precious, like he was trying to imprint himself on her soul, and Zane gave herself over completely to the intensity of it. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Ha-jin pulled her close and whispered against her hair. "You're mine now, completely. Say it, Zane. Tell me you're mine." "I'm yours," she whispered back, and felt his arms tighten around her with fierce satisfaction. But in the early morning hours, doubt crept in. Zayn woke before Ha-jin and watched him sleep, this powerful man who'd somehow become her entire world in just weeks. Fear flooded through her, memories of Marcus, of being used and discarded, of trusting too much too fast. What if this was just obsession that would fade? What if Ha-jin woke up and regretted claiming her so completely? What if she was just another conquest? She slipped out of bed with practiced silence, dressing quickly, leaving before he could wake and see the fear in her eyes. She left a note that simply said she needed time to think, then fled to her hotel, her heart breaking even as logic told her she was protecting herself. Ha-jin found the note and felt something close to panic, a foreign emotion he hadn't experienced since childhood. He called her repeatedly, texted, showed up at her hotel only to find she'd checked out. For 2 days, Zayn avoided him, and Ha-jin felt himself unravelling, the control he'd spent years building crumbling in the face of losing her. His men reported her location, and he forced himself not to storm in, to give her space even though every instinct screamed to claim her back. On the 3rd day, he sent a single text. "I know you're scared. I know. This is fast and intense and probably terrifying, but running from this, from us, won't make it less real. I'm not Marcus. I'm not going to use you and discard you. You're not a conquest or an obsession that will fade. You're the woman I want to build a life with, and if you need me to prove that, I'll spend every day doing exactly that. But please, Zayn, come back to me. Let me show you that choosing me isn't a mistake." Zayn read the message through tears, her heart warring with her head. Before she could respond, her phone rang with an unknown number. When she answered, Marcus's voice made her blood run cold. "Hello, Zayn. Heard you've been living well in Seoul. Dating some powerful men from what I can see on social media. We need to talk about that debt you left me with when you ran away." "I don't owe you anything," Zayn said, her voice shaking. "You created that debt in my name. I'm not responsible for your choices." "The courts might see it differently," Marcus said, smoothly. "Unless you want to make this go away, I'm in Seoul on business. Meet me tonight at the Hanam Hotel pool area, 9 o'clock. Come alone, or I start making calls to your new boyfriend's enemies. I'm sure they'd love to know about his weak spot." The line went dead, and Zayn sat frozen, terror flooding through her. She should call Ha-jin, should tell him, but Marcus's threat echoed in her mind. What if involving Ha-jin put him in danger? What if Marcus had connections she didn't know about? She'd spent her whole life fighting her own battles, and the instinct to protect herself, to handle this alone, overrode logic. That evening, Zayn arrived at the hotel pool area, the space deserted and dim, fairy lights reflecting off water. Marcus emerged from the shadows, and seeing him again made her stomach turn. He looked the same, handsome in that calculated way, but now she could see the cruelty underneath. "There's my girl," he said with false warmth. "Looking good, Zayn. Rich. Boyfriend treating you well?" "Say what you came to say," Zayn demanded, keeping distance between them. "It's simple," Marcus said, his smile turning ugly. "You're going to transfer me $50,000 or I'm going to make your life hell. I'll ruin your reputation, contact your magazine, tell everyone you're sleeping your way to stories, and I'll make sure your dangerous boyfriend knows exactly how you used to beg me to—" "You're disgusting," Zayn cut him off, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach where new life was just beginning to form, a secret she discovered only that morning. Marcus's eyes tracked the movement, and something vicious crossed his face. "Oh, this is perfect. You're pregnant, aren't you? Does he even know? Or are you trying to trap him the same way you tried to trap me?" He moved forward, backing her toward the pool. "Maybe I should save him the trouble of dealing with you." Everything happened too fast. Marcus lunged, his hands shoving hard against her shoulders, and Zayn felt herself falling backward, the world tilting, water rushing up to meet her. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs, cold shocking her system, and for a terrifying moment she couldn't tell which way was up. Then strong hands grabbed her, pulling her up and out of the water with desperate strength. Zayn gasped for air, water streaming down her face, and found herself pressed against Ha-jin's chest, his arms like steel bands around her. He was soaked, his expensive suit ruined, and his face was a mask of fury and terror as he looked her over frantically. "Are you hurt? The baby, Zayn, is the baby okay?" She stared at him in shock. "How did you—" "I've had men watching you since you ran," Ha-jin said roughly, his hands gentle as they checked her for injuries, even as his voice shook with rage. "I knew something was wrong when you came here. I knew you were in danger." His eyes lifted to where Marcus stood frozen at the pool's edge, and the expression on Ha-jin's face made Zayn shiver. It was death, pure and simple, wrapped in human form. Ha-jin set Zayn carefully on a pool lounger, stripping off his jacket to wrap around her shaking body. Then he turned to Marcus with terrifying calm. "You touched her," he said softly. "You threatened her. You pushed my pregnant wife into a pool and could have killed them both."